Thank you, Madhu and Mansi, for this joining for this session. Uh, so when we talk about democracy, it is often described as rule by the people. But in practice, citizens engage with democracy largely during the elections. We vote, we wait, we complain, and then 5 years later, we vote again. But democracy doesn't thrive on ballot box, and in our case, EVMs. It thrives in neighboring meetings, neighborhood meetings, public consultations, budget discussions, informed dialogue, and the everyday act of holding institutions accountable. So today's session, 5-year citizen, asks a simple but important question. What does it mean to be an active citizen between elections? And we'll explore how citizens can move from being passive recipients of governance to active co-creators of democracy. And to explore that, we have with us Mansi Verma. Mansi can anchor the conversation around democratic institutions, citizen participation, law, governance, and making policy making more accessible. Madhu Madhu can bring the urban governance and system lens, how citizenship is experienced in cities, how local governance affects everyday life, and how citizen participation can improve public systems and quality of life. So, Mansi, I would start from you. Your work sits at intersection of law, democracy, governance, and civic engagement. What does it mean for citizens to engage with democracy beyond simple voting for you?
Thanks for that question, Ankush. And I think thanks for also laying down that, democracy is not just about voting once and then waiting and then voting again. I think we also have a fundamentally flawed understanding of what we are actually doing when we are voting. So I like to look at the exercise of vote as a transfer of power, right? Because in a democracy, when we say, we all learn in school democracies, of the people, for the people, by the people. So in a democracy, the true sovereign, right? So we are a sovereign nation, which not just means that we are free from any external control, which we were not before independence. So we are an independent nation now. But in an independent nation, the true sovereign, the true holders of power are the people. So what we do when we cast that vote is that we transfer that power from us to our elected representative. And we transfer that power for a reason, right? We transfer that power. So, and then we expect something in return. So we are expecting good governance. We are expecting laws and regulations. But where there is power, there will be misuse of that power as well. That is a given. And so, therefore, when power flows from us to our elected representatives, what flows back is accountability or responsibility for how they have used that power and whether they have used that power for the larger good or not. So, therefore, the very act of voting is just an initiation of a kind of a relationship between the person who has voted and the person who has been voted to power. They are exercising this power which we have given to them, and so therefore they are responsible to us in return on how they have used that power. And so therefore, since this is a continuous conversation and engagement, it is not concluded just after you have casted your vote. In fact, it starts from there. So the next five years, whoever it is that you have elected, whether it is at the local government level, whether it is your MLA, whether it is your MP, whoever you have elected for the next 5 years, it is expected that you keep asking them, what are you doing with that power that I have given to you through my vote? how are you using that power to, make my life better? How are you using that power to make laws and policies which ultimately benefit me? So that is a conversation that needs to happen, and it does happen in some cases. There are people who have, taken that initiative to maintain that relationship with their MPs, with their MLAs, and they keep reaching out to them. Media plays an important role here as a mediator between us and our elected representatives. We expect the media to amplify our voices and to reach, those who are holding power, as a custodian, because just as we can give them that power, we can take it back in the next election as well. And so therefore, as you very rightly said, we don't necessarily need to wait in these five years for someone to come and do something for us. We are the ultimate sovereigns in a democracy. We are the ultimate holders of power in a democracy, and all that we need to do is just, exercise. And that exercise is also something which can, very simply happen just by asking, your MP on what is it that they did in parliament. So very recently, for instance, we prepared some report cards of some MPs from Bangalore, Chennai, and Mumbai, and we looked at what is it that these MPs did in the budget session of parliament. We looked at how many days they attended the parliament session, how many questions they raised in parliament, how many bills they participated in. All this information is very easily available for anyone who is looking. So I think what we need to do is that we need to start looking, we need to start asking, and we need to start engaging with those who are ultimately accountable to us.
Thanks for your opening thoughts, Mansi. And I think I would probably ask some questions around it in a party democracy like India, where most of the things work on whips. I guess it would be an interesting aspect to explore how these individual MPs can exercise their individual choices, or how much it matters for them to participate in such exercises. Um, Madhu, you work in the urban spaces and local democracy, as they say, like the third pillar of the democracy. It's an interesting space because if you look at the voting patterns, generally people in the urban spaces vote in lesser percentages. They also have this, I would say, um, uh, they basically throw around their weight saying that we are the ones who pay most of the taxes. Uh, but at the same time, they also face issues of roads, waterways, safety. What does everyday citizenship look like at the local level?
Thanks, Ankush, for asking the right question. So, there's no actual real-time yes or no answer to it. So, but to set the context, in fact, see, which is where actually Janaagraha as an organization has been working a lot, is seeing like where how cities are actually empowered in terms of their local government. See, we say that they are a third tier of the government, but actually, it is not. It is actually subdued by what the states who determine what needs to be done at the cities level also. So the all the urban local governments, we want to consider them as urban local self governments, right? But which is not actually the case. And that self government has a very kind of important kind of a terminology which needs to kind of have some weight to it, right? And which, because it brings a lot of weight to the citizen as the forefront. So in fact, Manasi did bring a lot of context to it, is that, but the biggest problem is that, see, to whom we can actually access much easier, right? So to whom we can push the needle. So for a person who is, say, is living in a locality, it would be their ward councillors, right? So and they would be the first interface for them to flush out their anger or tell them, okay, what needs to be done, right? And which is exactly where the systematic issues lie. And of course, there is of course a lot of institutional aspects involved to it, which probably I think Manasi has done a lot of work, and we did a kind of a large scale kind of assessment on how these things perform and how it actually translates into action. And this is where I think, see, I think Ankush, you started with the whole wording called active citizenship, right? I think this is the whole point. Like, I believe that people are active and they have been channelizing their thoughts, say through media, social media, whatever is the context, right? What are the platforms they have? But the problem is how to convert these into real-time changes. So whether it could be a policy level changes, maybe at the national level, to a small thing is like removing dustbins, or kind of fixing your roads in your street, right? But the scale might be different, and which means because the scale is different, the way in which your engagement is also needs to be kind of looked at from a prism of how they are able to utilize the opportunities. So I'll just kind of lay down, I think there are four larger, I would say, broad principles based on which we can actually say, okay, that we say citizenship participation or a citizen centric system should be there. And this is where I think it does not end with the whole point of just voting, I think, right? So the whole point is like whether you have institutionalized it, and voting is one form of institutionalization where you can actually participate, go and put your kind of a agreement on whom you want to have or not, right? But the second thing is, of course, a part of the institutional process is, of course, especially the local government, right? Do you have a platform to voice your concerns about, say, your street, which is where you always walk through, right? Or the street lights are not functioning. So, which is why I did mention about the councillor's role, a big prominent thing. But one reality which you need to do is, and which is exactly what probably Mansi will also agree, is the access point, which is what I want to again still say. Even for a ward level councillor, imagine the number of people they have to kind of represent, right? So a ward is, of course, say one councillor of one ward. If you typically look at any Indian city, spans from around 30,000 to 60,000 or 70,000 people. Say in cities like Mumbai is around more than that. So imagine how do they actually be able to kind of put their voices heard, right? And social media and other platforms are good at amplifying it, right? But see, unless and until the change makers are able to kind of use your voice to kind of do the final thing, that is the final change, then probably that's where the democracy needs to kind of start pushing forward, right? It is not just the representation which matters, but it is the way in which your voices are heard and actually executed at the final layers of the government, right? Which is what I think matters, and that is where I wanted to bring the whole thing. Like, at least at the local level, we have that action. Maybe we can't go and meet the prime minister every day or the president every day, but at least we can have a conversation with councillors and express what should be their priority for the locality, right? And in fact, there are many institutions which, like ward committees, area sabhas, and there are other kind of initiatives which are there for which you can actually do that, right? And then I would say that is the first level of kind of what we call as a kind of a guiding principle, which kind of determines how citizens' participation would matter and how well it would matters, right? The second would be, of course, the decentralization, which is what I already reflected upon, right? You need to have a decentralized system, and as close as like an RWA, a residents association, whom you can actually bank on to fix certain problems, and they could be your voice for your residents' issues, right? The third level is, of course, inclusiveness, and this is where I would say, and Ankush, I am just responding to that, where urban cities are facing a crunch, right? The point is that if you look at cities, there is no, I would say, citizenship matters when there is a significant population who have been residing for a long time, right? But in cities, the problem is like you have a lot of migrant population, or what we call as transitioning workers and other people, right? And there are also a lot of underrepresented voices whom we don't actually take care of, right? And they also do matter. And this is where the whole debate about the division between cities policies, for whom it is meant, and how does they engage, that do they kind of cover all the marginalized population to the migrant population, does matter for the in terms of the democracy. Because the more we say is about inclusiveness, in fact, if you look at, forget about voting, they are not even able to kind of imagine the kind of cities or places where they live. I would say the situation is pathetic, right? In those cities compared to, or not in those places compared to places where you have residents, associations, and other voiced systems in place, right? So that is something of a kind of a concern which probably we need to kind of push more forward. And Ankush, I think I just take one more minute for explaining. Like, in fact, you remember, like in UK, when the Brexit discussion would happen, people who were students were also had the opportunity to kind of voice their kind of a vote and tell, okay, that whether they want Brexit or not. So imagine that sort of system in that context. So I'm not going to the nitty-gritties of whether it's a good or bad thing, but at least there is a system which is open and inclusive in that context, right? And the fourth thing is, of course, I think this is a very kind of a clear case where technology does matter, and this is why I said now I think all the people have a very good platform to amplify their voices. Earlier, that was not the case. I would say the last 10 years, especially, has been very dramatic in terms of how inclusive they have been. So people from any village can actually even voice their concern about any issue across any country or global matters for that matter, right? But of course, how does it actually kind of reflect or make the changes work? Probably we need to kind of discuss. So I'll kind of set this kind of larger principles for us to have the conversation, and then probably have more I mean, I can share a few more examples of how things are working on the ground too, right? Yes.
No, fair enough, Madhu, and thanks for setting that framework here of the four layers that involve in the urban citizenship, or for that matter, like the local governance and local involvement of citizen in the whole administrative process. I have an interesting question, Mansi. I think are our institution designed to listen to citizens, or only to receive grievances? And if you look at the law and policy spaces specifically, do you think it becomes too intimidating for ordinary citizens to engage with it?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting way of framing, because listening is an active process, right? You are actually imbibing what somebody is saying and you're responding to it. That unfortunately doesn't really happen much. There are some good examples there, where institutions really listen. So if I were to give one example, I would give the example of the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, which has set actually a very high bar on how to do inclusive and transparent public consultations. And the reason for that is that it is laid down in the very law of, which set up the TRAI, which makes it mandatory for them to do public consultation every time they come out with a new regulation. And so what they do is that they not just, and what the practice that we usually see whenever government invites comments is that it would just place the draft of the law in public domain and ask people to read it and share their comments. But a lot of people struggle to even make sense of the legal language. Beyond lawyers and those who have been working on these issues, which might be quite technical, a lot of people are not able to make sense of it. So what TRAI, for instance, does it that they don't just place their regulations in the public domain. They supplement it with some kind of a explanation or a white paper on why is it that we are coming up with these regulations, what is it that we think these regulations can do, how these regulations may impact you. And so that helps somebody who is going through the regulations to think through what is it going to have, about kind of an impact is this going to have on my life. And then the comments that come in, TRAI proactively publishes all those comments on its website. And so you can see from an ordinary citizen to a telecom company, whoever has sent in their comments, it's all out in the open. There is complete transparency. You can see all of that. And then you can even give your counter comments. And, which is actually a practice which is I haven't really seen it being followed by any other regulatory authority or any other government department, which is to invite counter comments to comments which have come in. And then after taking all of this into consideration, TRAI then finalizes its regulation. So this is one really good practice that I haven't really seen other authorities or bodies follow. But overall, otherwise, I mean, beyond, these kind of exceptional cases, what we generally see is a certain reluctance in involving people in the making of laws and policies. Now, this reluctance may stem from various reasons. One, it could just be the amount of work that is involved in it, and often, you just think that if you were to place something in public domain and if thousands of people were to respond to it, how would you even manage all the feedback that will come in? So one, just sort of avoiding all of that work that will happen. The second is this sort of feeling, or rather this thinking which has set in, especially in our bureaucracy, which is that they know best. And we know what is good for you, you don't know what is good for you. So we will tell you, we have made this law and policy, this is the best that can happen, and so therefore what we are giving you, just accept it as it is. I think this is a denial of the agency of people to think for themselves. I should be able to decide for myself whether a particular law, policy, or regulation is going to harm me or benefit me or not. And I have that inherent intelligence. It's not like I have to be a literate, or I have to be a lawyer, or I have to be somebody who is expert in a particular subject to understand. I think everyone inherently has that ability to understand, if so and so law was to be implemented on the ground, what is the impact it is going to have on my life. And when we are not involving people in the making of laws and policies, we are denying them that agency. We are saying, like I said, we are saying you don't know what works for you, but we know that. So whether it is reluctance, whether it is just sheer lethargy, or whether it is this feeling that we know best, unfortunately, we have seen a kind of a system that has set in where public consultation is not seen as something which is either good, which adds value, or something which should be done as a very, very basic manifestation of democracy. So like you said, if we understand democracy only to mean that you have cast your vote and then it's over, then of course, then you don't need to do public consultation. But if we were to understand public consultation as an extension of the principle of democracy, where people have an agency, where people have a voice, where people have a right to decide their destiny, then public consultation is a must. And if I were to give you an example, very quick one. So we often compare, for instance, when we look at India as a democracy with certain other new democracies, right, which also gained independence around the same time as India did or after us. And interestingly, what you find is that in a lot of constitutions of democracies which underwent the constitution drafting process after India did, many of those constitutions have laid down in the constitution itself that public has to be involved in the making of laws and policies. One example that I can give you is of South Africa, which has very clearly enjoined a duty on the parliament. So their parliament is called the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces. So their National Assembly has a duty laid down in the constitution that every time a law or policy is to be made, public has to be consulted and involved in the process. But unfortunately, what we see in India is that, there is nothing in the constitution which says that people have to be involved. And this is an irony, because the making of the constitution itself was a very inclusive process. It was a process where, in which a lot of consultation had happened with the people. But the constitution makers, either had tremendous faith in what was to come after, or who were to follow, that they would also continue doing this practice, or they did not include it in as many words in the constitution. We also do not have a law we do have a policy called the pre-legislative consultation policy, which was drafted in 2014. But since it is a policy, it is directory in nature. It does ask every government, ministry, department, whether the union or the state level, to involve people in the making of laws and policies. But because it is not mandatory, it is not always followed. So some government and departments, if they feel like doing public consultation, they do it. Otherwise, they don't. So therefore, some outlier cases like TRI are there, which I hope other regulatory bodies and other government departments also follow their practice. But otherwise, the constitution is silent on it. The laws, there is no law, and the policy, because it is not mandatory, is not followed in all cases. So that is sort of, like the landscape of, whether as public, we have, whether we can claim even a right to say that, we should be involved in the making of laws and policies. And unfortunately, we can't.
No, very pertinent points. And I think maybe this is the time for us to move towards what we call as like democracy 2.0 and make it more active citizenry based constitution than just restricting our roles to casting our votes. And which
sorry, very quickly, you had also asked whether people are intimidated in engaging with institutions. I think my experience has been that there is no intimidation, but there is definitely some distrust. So people actually think, okay, so government has invited comments. When they do, government has invited comments, and we will give our comments also. But then what happens? We don't know.
Right.
It's like it's like you keep sending your feedback, you keep sending your comments, but eventually the government does what it wanted to do in the first place. So it creates a distrust in the system, where people then feel that it's of no use of engaging in the system. But in my experience, every time that opportunity has been given, every time the government has invited comments, every time some draft has been placed in public domain and people have been asked for their feedback, people have responded. And there have been some extraordinary cases of thousands and lakhs, even lakhs of feedback and comments coming into the government. So that has also been there. People are not intimidated, but people definitely feel that, is this even going to lead to something? That, I think, is something that we definitely need to work more on, and greater transparency would definitely help there.
No, definitely. I think I think that's one aspect we have to work on. And I think as you said, like maybe the problem is not that the citizens are apathetic. It's like that people think that their participation has been not made meaningful enough, right? So Madhu, Janaagraha does a lot of work on especially urban institutions, and some of it is around participatory budgeting and involving citizens in ensuring how the administration functions. How has been the experience so far? Because I think in many of the cities, like including Bangalore, where the Janaagraha started, there is a good enough component for people to participate and basically give their suggestions on how the budget should be allocated and all. So how involved the citizens in those cases where actually there has been something factored out for them to work on, do they care?
Of course, I would say they would care. I'm slightly optimistic on that. People do care, and it's just a matter of they don't know how to do it right. I mean, especially people of a younger generation, of course, have this question, like they have so many issues confronting, but they don't know how to kind of involve in all this discourses, which is why the least they could do is post about it, talk about it in their circles, right? But how does it translate into action? And this is where I stopped my earlier point. I think this is where I think it does make sense. And in fact, in our work also, especially at cities, especially in Bangalore, what we say is that we see is that there has been a kind of a movement based.
Madhu, it seems we lost the connection.
Ways in which things which you could actually kind of mentioned, and I would say not illegal, but measures which might not be prescribed in the constitution, but something which we can definitely work around, right? And this is where I think one case is, of course, is uh, yeah. So one case where actually one thing is the way in which we can engage is through ward committees, right? So in fact, so in the constitution does prescribe what we call as a ward committee, that is they mentioned wards committee, that is 2 or 3 wards pulled together and have a committee where people can actually raise their voice, discuss about issues, and try to bring some policy level change. But in fact, our experience in Bangalore, especially, what we see is that we had a very great opportunity to work with the city governments there, and especially the BBMP, the Bangalore Municipal Corporation, on a lot of things. And one thing which was very striking is, of course, the participatory budgeting, right? So we had this campaign called My City, My Budget, and it was actually a moment where in which people used to pull out their concerns, their issues, and what they want to be in the budget. So till then, we used to consider budget as a very technical document, right? We don't know what's small numbers, facts, and we don't know how it. But if you tilt the whole thing, right, the whole conversation, and this is where I think a lot to do with the way in which citizens also need to own things. And in fact, Ankush, the whole idea about the Pico World Summit is, of course, how does you actually go on the change, right? So this is where I would say a little bit of responsibility lies with citizens, or we as citizens, is what are the ways in which we can actually participate in. And that's, I would say, not just being active, it should be more proactive also to make some extent, right? And what are the ways in which we can do that? So one is, of course, I did mention about what committees or what committees. So in Bangalore, we tried it out actually for the My City, My Budget. So we got around more than 1 lakh inputs on our platform. So in fact, the BBMP also had a city budget bus going across the cities and getting polling information and trying to get feedback about what they want to do. And imagine, so this is where the translation, actually, this is what I want to emphasize at. Uh, by just collecting you information doesn't mean that you're done the whole thing, right? The point is these inputs were actually looked up and were taken into action. So around 600 crores of budget of BBMP was actually assigned in areas which this My City, My Budget platform had actually reached. So we prioritized it, we scaled it, we rated it, and said that, okay, these are the primary areas of concerns which people, and they want to have your budget speaking about it, right? And this actually started in around 2015 and still continuing. It's like a big exercise happening. So I would say, like, there are similar examples. In fact, of course, if you look at institutional, there are hardly 2 or 3 cities in India specifically which has mandated participatory budgeting. So that is, I would say, a bigger policy challenge. Takes a lot of effort, but at least when we actually the citizens are able to co-own or be a part of the system, I don't say we don't need to wait for that to happen. So, and I am sure whether it's
But probe
councillors,
it more. I would like to understand, like, uh, first challenge is obviously to get government or those local governments accept this as a policy.
right, exactly. So that is where I'm coming to. Yeah.
That's
So this
that's
is where
tough.
the peer pressure has to happen, right? So how
Right.
do you bring that pressure tactics, I would say, to nudge the people who are in the power circles to really look into it, right? So
I'm interested more in the second part where it has happened, right? As in the case of Bangalore,
right,
or in case of Pune. Uh, how's the citizen involvement? And you mentioned like it's happening from 2015 onwards, and now it's almost like 600 CR they are have
right.
allocated. But how difficult it is to engage the citizen to participate, and or rather like how much they're um, onboarding get onboarded easily on that part and don't take it as like a tokenism.
Right. No, very valid question. In fact, of course, it's not an easy task. So, in fact, which is where I think the whole point is about how do you amplify your voice, right? So in fact, there is always a challenge that some of the aspects which might fritter down because there's so many issues, so many concerns, right? And people don't agree together, right? So it's all about consolidating those things. And in fact, but if you, that's why I brought in this simple case, like which are the larger issues you feel people will talk about, right? I'm sure the top 10 cases or top two or three would be talking about roads, talking about your waste management, or something to do with with electricity or power utilities and other things, right? And this is where I would say a lot of change has actually happened. So because of the fact that somebody's actually a group of people and a big voice is raised about the way in which your roads are not functioning or not probably done, it amplifies and there is a peer pressure to kind of act upon it, for the government to do it. And but imagine, so this is why I see the disconnect. So you are not here as a citizens just reflecting or amplifying your voices, but how, what is the effort you take actually to bring that voice into a platform, right? I think that does matter a lot. Is your counselor be part of your discussion? Just putting it in a platform and staying there, but doesn't actually bring that change, right? But if the conversation is, has your counselors involved or has your say MLAs involved, I would say that would be a big, that would bring a big change. And this is what I would say from our experience. The moment they get step into this, people are actually see the difference, right? Otherwise, it's all about repeating the same kind of challenges, and you don't get that feeling of it, what's happening, and there's nothing happening, right? But which is where I think and in fact I did mention that first case is like you need to have an institutional way in which you have this channeled out. And I would say at the starting from the local level is of course the ward committees and ward committees. But in fact, if you look at India, there are hardly four out of 36 states have ward committees part of the law, right? So imagine the scale in which we need to go, right? And I'm sure like how many of us around have talked about, okay, we need spoken to our counselors. Do we have a platform to speak about, speak to them, right? We don't know, and we don't bring that conversation, which is exactly why we get frustrated,
Yeah.
right? So the system is there, the law is there, but the practice shows that, and that it does not exist, right? So
Yeah.
maybe the change might be, okay, bring that layer, have people start talking about it, then it might get institutionalized. If it's not institutionalized, still there are a lot of ways in which you can do. And I think I did bring up earlier also about how the RTI whole law was actually codified. It had a lot of community participation.
Yeah.
It
So I
brought
would like
into
to come to
something.
the second part of the conversation here. As you mentioned, RTI. Uh, I would talk about like the tools citizens right now have, right? Uh, there are tools which the government has enabled, like RTI, Jan Sunwai in many cases, and many states also have social audits in place. There are other tools which have been nurtured by the civil society, like My Neta, ADR, uh, also to an extent, if you look at PRS, which does a lot of legislative research. Then, as you said, like, some public consultations happen. Uh, then we have tools like MyGov, which started with a lot of fanfare, and I think I also was quite hopeful and optimist about how it would probably change how the citizens are getting involved in the whole governance process. Uh, then there are other tools like which are part of like the, I would say, like the constitutional mandate, like there should be ward committees, area sabhas, and all that. Uh, I would ask Mansi, what do you think is the most underused democratic tool available to citizen today?
I think the most, that's a very interesting question. I would say the most underused tool that is available to citizens for participation in law and policy making today is interacting with parliamentary committees, or for that matter, even committees that are set up at the assembly level. So in parliament and in assemblies, we do not have any formal mechanism to involve people in the making of laws and policies other than through the committees. So if a bill that the government has brought has been referred to a committee, usually as through convention, the committee then invites people to give their comments, and the committee also goes around, does visits different places, speaks to people. It also invites experts and stakeholders to come and interact with the committee, to depose, to give evidence, etc. And I think this is something I have, at least in my line of work, I have been encouraging a lot of civil society organizations, a lot of active citizen groups, etc., to engage with the committees, and to do it even in a more proactive manner. So you don't have to wait for the committee to, publish a advertisement in the newspaper asking for feedback and comment. You write to the committee, because these, committees comprise of your public representatives, and they are, supposed to listen to you when they are making laws and policies. So that, I think, is one of the most underutilized platform for participation in law and policy making. But unfortunately, there also what we have seen is that since sending a bill to a committee, or the committees, it is the committee's prerogative to invite. There have been instances in the past where committees have considered bills, but they haven't done any public consultation on them. They have selectively invited some experts to come and speak to them. There have been instances where bills have not been sent to committees at all, and they have been passed like that. So there have been. I mean, it's not a completely rosy picture in that sense that committees exist and you should engage with them. There are, of course, institutional bottlenecks there as well. But even when a bill is sent to a committee and the committee invites comments, often it happens that people don't come to know about it because it is not publicized as much as it should, and people don't engage with it as much as they should, or they don't engage with parliamentary committees as proactively as they should. And that is something that I've made a kind of a mission of the work that I do, is to encourage more and more people to engage with parliamentary committees and assembly committees as well.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, I think, and also looking at the data, how many bills are now being sent to the parliamentary committees. That's also interesting challenge the citizens are facing in terms of their engagement, and probably more consultations. Even, I mean, there are two modes of consultations happen. One is like activist citizen, and the other is like larger citizens bodies, which generally feel quite apathetic to this whole process because they feel that there is no point doing this. But the activist citizen also are getting outcasted from this whole process. That's also a new challenge which is emerging, and that's why I think something like what you mentioned, giving an example of.
But one thing that I really like about activist citizens is that they never give up. So they know that the institution in 9 out of 10 cases is not going to respond, but they will still write. They will still make sure that they are reaching out to the institution, whether or not the institution returns that gesture or not. So that, I think, is very, very important, because I know giving up is easy. I know feeling apathetic is easy. Harboring that distrust is easy, but to overcome all of that and still engage with the institution is what makes you an active citizen, I think.
Right. I think from here, I would take it to the next segment of our discussion, is who should take the lead in making citizenship more participative? State has all the might, the administration has all the load, and I'm not sure how much any of them are interested in making their work more difficult. So, where does this stop? Who would be taking the lead here? We can start maybe with Madhu, and Mansi, you can also jump in with the comments.
Yeah, so I would of course look at citizens because for me they should be at the center of all the things. So which is why I started the whole conversation. Like you need to have the, I mean, it's a lot to do with which the way in which we have been brought up in terms of how citizens engagement, is it a part of our conversation, right? We have been asked to kind of, we have been taught to like follow the rules, follow the the systems, right? But maybe the questioning aspect is something which comes from the vigor or the rigor which needs to come out for people, right? And I think this is where I said, I think ownership, it's something very different from just raising your voice, right? Owning from what you could actually do. Maybe there are things which are beyond the control, which I completely agree. But there are some things which under your control, which you still can voice your concern, right? So remember the whole global revolutions happening, like it might started with someone speaking against it, right? And then though it became a movement and then started picking it up, right? So it's the same case here, right? I would say maybe much more in a positive manner is that you need to bring that's where actually I started with the whole principles so that we know like how citizens can actually engage. You need to have all this process set. So then making them speak more, making them involved more, making them as a part of the system is actually more important. Now we always see, as Mansi rightly said, people sitting in the capital cities feel that okay, I know everything and I do everything, and they design systems for them, right? And think about a situation in countries like India where you're so diverse a population, planning for the whole country from one place, it's a most worst thing to happen, right? And you can see the fallouts in anything, right? So, and in fact, this happens even in designing the schemes, uh, not just the policies, in all the things, initiatives, the way in which some of the parliamentarians speak about it. The context is actually very limited, right? And this is where I would say the media has a bigger role to play, and people have to actually now start taking up by themselves to kind of bridge that gap. So I just believe that okay, citizens have a larger role to play, and probably we have so many ways and we have so many examples how things have moved forward on that context.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting, I would say, like uh, two of you and Mansi, you have also worked with Janaagraha. So Janaagraha is an organization which works very closely with the government, and what you are building right now, Maadhyam, is something which basically not working so closely with the government, but ensuring that someone is showing the mirror to the government that this is what is happening and this is how it should be happening. And I think both the players have their roles, and so that's where I wanted to come to the ecosystem aspect of it, like how the ecosystem is thriving and has it gone down or is it getting better in last few years or last 20 years or um, also I would like to take your comment on a mechanism which we had which started in 2004 around National Advisory Council, which worked very closely with the government, had civil society representation, and the government became quite right based setup where so many rights, right to food, right to information, and so many other initiative. In fact, Forest Rights Act and everything have
Right
come.
to education.
Right to
Yeah.
education, all that happened at that point of time.
Hmm.
Do you think we are missing something of that sort? Should we bring that back, or were there drawbacks of an arrangement of like that?
So I think first to answer your first question about ecosystem, and I think you've rightly identified, for instance, organizations like Janaagraha, and there are other, citizen groups as well. There is one organization called Civis. There are organizations, there are other ways of mobilizing people. There are organizations like Jhatka, and then there might be some, very specific issue-based organizations which are representing people's voices and doing advocacy on specific issues. So on digital rights, for instance, you would have Internet Freedom Foundation. On child rights, you may have CRY, for instance, or certain other right to education forum, etc. On forest rights, there are several groups which exist, which take for people who live in forest along with them when they are doing advocacy with the government. So I think what has been interesting in the last several years, and I have worked with several of these organizations, is this emergence of organizations, groups, which specifically, exist for the purpose of channeling, people's opinions, people's lived realities on the ground, and making sure that it reaches those who are making policies, whether it is engaging with your parliamentarians, or whether it is engaging with your MLAs, or whether it is engaging with bureaucrats and ministers, because it's not always possible for an ordinary person, an Adivasi who's living in the jungles of Bastar, Chhattisgarh, to come all the way to Delhi to meet somebody. But organizations who are working with them on the ground, and then who also can sort of engage in this in these kind of policy conversations with policymakers, do I think play a very, very important role in mobilizing and channelizing people's opinion, and making sure that it is involved in the policy making process. And I have worked in the last several years with many of these organizations, but I must say that it is becoming challenging for these organizations to continue to work, because there is, again, certain, like I said, one is that if the government is not keen on engaging, then even if you sort of approach them, you set up meetings, you have a conversations, but at the end of it, you would still get the feeling that we are just basically screaming in the void, and nothing's going to happen. So if there is no intent, if there is no real intent in engaging with the people, then all of these efforts also may not, may only move the needle so much, and the real change may not happen. And plus, then there are some other legal and regulatory issues as well. For instance, laws like FCRA, etc., which may sometimes really restrict how much an organization can do in terms of influencing policy, etc. So it's not an easy sort of landscape to exist in, but despite that, there are several organizations and groups which continue to do the difficult work of making sure that people's voices do get represented in the making of laws and policies. So that is, in response to your first question. And I definitely think that there is scope to do much more. There is a lot of possibility for more such, advocacy groups, pressure groups, as Madhu had used the word of peer pressure. So pressure groups to come up, and they don't always have to exist in a very formal organization sense. So even RWA, for instance, is a kind of a pressure group, is a kind of a advocacy group, that exists solely for the purpose of advocating for the rights of those residents. So such groups, citizen groups, etc., can come up, and they often do come up, and sometimes it's completely ad hoc, like one issue around which all the citizens will come together to rally. So we have seen, for instance, really random people coming together to save some trees in a forest. And so it doesn't take an established NGO to come and do that kind of work. It just takes some well-meaning people to come out and say, we want this to happen, or we don't want this to happen, and we are going to take action. So it does start with the citizens, as Madhu also rightly organized, but then you can have certain organizations, groups, etc., which try and give it a more organized and meaningful shape. But ultimately, the responsibility to institutionalize public consultation does lie with the government. So that, I think, is a given. Now, with respect to your second question, so sorry, I've just lost my train of thought. What was the second question that you had asked?
Consulting body like National Advisory.
NAC, yeah. See, I think if one were to look at the output of the entire exercise, right? And you also very rightly recognize that there were a string of rights-based legislation that came out during that period between 2004 and 2014. So if you just look at the output of that entire exercise, it does seem like a great thing that existed, which brought together some really very, very well-known, very well people who knew the issues that they were talking about. They had worked on the ground. They were academicians. They were experts. They were grassroots activists, and they knew what they were talking about. And on the other hand, you had people from representatives of the government who were willing to listen. So it did seem like a very good platform if you were to just look at the output of the exercise. Now, I know that people have been critical of the entire process, that it wasn't, perhaps the most inclusive. There were other voices which should have also been included in the process. It may not have been entirely transparent in the way it was working, but those kind of procedural concerns can be addressed if substantively the idea is good, because the idea essentially is that a platform should exist where government and civil society and people can come together to deliberate on laws and policies. The idea is, of course, there is nothing wrong in that idea. It's absolutely fantastic and should exist. Procedures we can figure out. What is the best way to make this happen? Whether NAC was the best way, or you think of other things. And in fact, in many other democracies, something like citizen assemblies is a very regular thing. Citizen assemblies where government and people, of course, it may not happen at the national level, it may happen more at the local or the state level, but the idea is for a body to exist where people and government representatives can come together to have that conversation about what laws, what policies, what budgetary priorities should be there. And we absolutely need a platform like that. The design of the platform is something that we can debate. But I definitely think it was, if I were to just look at the output of that entire exercise, I think it was fantastic, and it's definitely a loss that we don't have something like that anymore. But we should definitely consider what can be a better model to replace it with, instead of just doing away with it completely.
Right. Madhu, I have another very interesting question for you. Two parts. One, how we ensure that when we make the participative process of administration, how to ensure that it doesn't get captured by the elites. You yourself mentioned there are areas where people don't have a voice. They stay in areas where probably are not even recognized as habitations on the government records. So how to make it all inclusive and ensure that the elites are not capturing this whole process?
Yeah, in fact, I was just about to kind of reflect on that too. I completely agree. This is a big concern, in fact, and I definitely want to bring this RW example. I think you can say Gurugram is a classic case. When the monsoon came, the cities got flooded. The RWs were actually protecting their territory, and look at what's happening just outside. So it's like my rights stays with me, and my responsibilities also stays with my boundary, right? And this is a bigger concern. In fact, I think this is where probably I completely agree with Mansi on the way in which the institution should be actually the system should be in place to kind of tackle this, right? Even if there is no presence of a community, or there is no kind of a voice being represented. And I think it need to kind of go a long way in which and of course there's no uh, I would say one approach which can actually reflect in which the way in which some of these things can be tackled. So elitist capture is a kind of a common concern, I would say, across global. In fact, we all agree how say some of the companies are able to dictate some of the laws, or some of the policies in that matter, right? So in fact, in my previous work also, I could see the public consultations actually started and ended with say some of the companies representatives coming and speaking about it. So and this is a kind of a larger concern of two areas. One, probably the government also doesn't know whom to kind of speak to because of the lack of any institution or a community participation. That definitely happens. The second is, of course, as Mansir started with, the way in which there's a trust deficit or a concern with, say, entities of the government in power about bringing a lot of voices, and might end up curtailing what they actually have in place. And that I would say is like a democracy issue. I mean, a democratic problem, I would say. Even the fact that we are still struggling out to have a very good opposition to actually strike at some of the policy decisions. Same is like way in which the communities have actually is not able to kind of reflect on their ideas. So I of course it's not a kind of a remedy which needs to happen, but one way I would always believe is the case where the more it gets amplified, you cannot ignore. And in fact, I don't want to bring specific examples, but you can see in the last week you could see that being in picture, right, coming from the educational space, especially, right, where people were had to kind of, whether it's whether they were forced to do it or not is irrespective of that, but voices were actually being heard at the corridors of power, and they had to hear it out, right?
Yeah.
So I would say that's probably it all comes to the way in which the more the people built upon their the and amplified, then to some extent this elitist or crowding can actually kind of be tackled.
Right. So I think I would like to bring another aspect here is uh, absence of data, I would say. I think gradually, I think the governments and the administration has been doing away with the exercises which can create uncomfortable data. Uh, and so I would like to understand at the local level, at the urban administration level, what are the eyes and ears of the administration or the local bodies? Where do they hear? Like where do they hear from and decide this is what is needed? And I think that becomes extremely challenging right now. And that's a problem at the state level and national level as well. But do you see anything happening at that front?
Right, I think that's a very critical point. In fact, so I can bring some experience. Or the work which we are currently actually working in Bangalore is something called radical transparency. Right, so you have something like, say, for example, the budget. We get to know in the papers saying that okay, X crores of rupees has been allotted for this project, right? But we don't know where it goes and whether it's been utilized. Zero transparency in that way, right? We have zero data also. So this is a kind of I would say, a community level driven campaign which Janaagraha is actually pushing, starting with Bangalore, and of course we're spreading it out, is to bring that data and talk about it. So people should have know where your budget, so they are actually spending their money, right? Their taxes are being used to fund something. It's more of ensuring that okay, if there is a project being sanctioned or a scheme being kind of being proposed and a budget is being allocated, tell us where that budget is allocated to, which all heads and to which all present, and how does it actually translate to, right? So whole point of this campaign is like we want, so in fact this starts with the data point. So you need to have ward level data currently, which is completely missing, right? And the whole thing, right? We don't have ward level data. So what does it mean? We don't have information about, say, how much of, say, cities waste is generated in particular ward. So you talk about uh, tackling waste as a problem, but we don't know how much of waste has been collected, right? But you actually, your procurement says that I have assigned a solid waste guy to actually handle the waste management. But he or she does not know, the company does not know how much of weight it comes and how much they have to process. It's might be sounding very simple, but this is actually tricky. And in many cities they have struggled because and it's not streamlined also because of the fact that there is no system in place. One day there will be a lot of waste piled up and coming to their the dump page yards, but next day there won't be anything, right? There's no coordinated mechanism. So in fact this is where we need to start building ward level data, and this is where Ankush, I think the whole point is to engage the citizens much more proactively. So we had a kind of a long, quite of a long time before, we had an initiative where we used to start rating wards. So in fact, recently last year also we had published this something called ward rating score. So the idea is like you come out with a report card of your ward and say that okay, I rate my ward on 10 parameters. So out of 5 of them, I give a scoring. Now this report card is actually based on the evidence which is all the people in my ward collect. So I know everyone talking about the same issue means that that ward has this scored very poorly in that side. So I talk about roads. All the ward councillor, the people in that ward talks about road as a bigger problem. So my report card will show it's very poor in nature, right? And this report card is actually now goes to the councillor. He's also part of the process. He's not an alien to this process. He or she is also part of this. And then it's actually goes to the discussion within the municipal corporation where this is going to be discussed. And this is where I think, Ankush, your point about, to some extent, I would say there will be some level of deliberation. Now, how it will happen is a matter of kind of a group kind of working, and how the systems actually perform, right? But I would say this is one way of looking at things, and maybe there are a lot of examples which we can cite to kind of improve the system. But at least we need to start from that a data evidence based mechanism where citizens. So we always say that, okay, that see, what is data end of the day? There is a human there, right? So he or she is speaking, and that goes to the data. But that flagging the data, you can use AI, different tools to kind of collate, kind of clean the data, but and kind of push the top priority agendas for the city. And this is exactly what we did at Janaagraha, to kind of list out, say, top 5 things which the city's citizens have actually reported, and get your councillors to talk about it in the council and get things moved forward. So this is the way in which we had actually tried to kind of push things at the city level.
Right. And now we have probably a few more minutes left, and I think I would just like probably ask one last question and then your thoughts around it, and maybe if anybody from the participants also want to speak. One interesting aspect of it is like there are like clear political ramification of any such intervention and any such design in place. And I feel any citizen-centric initiative, because it's all so chaotic here, has to be designed in a manner that becomes either politically rewarding or can create that kind of punitive action, or can generate that kind of punitive action from citizens, that people start taking it seriously. Maybe the administration or even the government or the local government for that matter. So what do you think? Like, do you think it's a design issue, or because of the inherent nature of political linkage of anything which happens in this space, or a general, I would say, restraint from anybody working in this space to not muddle in that space to probably touch upon some of those actors who might then would not let them do what they are doing currently?
So I think, see, from my experience, political ramifications can go in different ways. So we have, for instance, seen whenever people have tried to engage with MPs, because that's sort of like the space that I work in, engaging with MPs and engaging with Parliament. What we have seen is that people do, for instance, may have this concern about the fact that if they are only engaging with the MPs from the opposition, then they may be seen a certain way. And so what people try to do is that then you are sort of trying to engage with everyone, but that somebody who's coming from the party which is in power, even if they want to do something, they might not be able to, given just what the political reality is. And so that the person who would be most ready and willing and able to help you is going to be somebody from the opposition. But then, the kind of a space that exists for somebody from the opposition political parties to speak up may be very limited. So I think a lot of people who work in this domain, who are, trying to reach out to, whether it is their political leaders, are always trying to do this calculation of what will work best, whether we should reach out to somebody from the party which is in power or the opposition or an independent. Even, for instance, a lot of people have a lot of what's the correct way of saying it? So they would rather engage with the bureaucrat because they think that the bureaucrat can actually do something, and they would hesitate in engaging with their elected representative because they think that elected representatives are too powerless to be able to do anything. So there are, a lot of calculations that go on in the mind of somebody who's trying to decide who they should reach out to. And it's not just about who they should reach out to, it's also about what is the messaging that you're using, what is what is it that you're saying. So for instance, you can clearly see that a certain policy is not working on the ground, but then that maybe if you go to somebody and frame it in a way that you are being critical of a particular policy, the other person is not going to listen to you. So you also have to do a lot of calculation on how do you frame your messaging, how do you say what you need to say. And so advocacy is really, I mean, it's really both an art and a science. You have to really balance yourself on multiple scales and make sure that you do not end up offending somebody while trying to just very simply ask for your rights. So yes, so politically it's a difficult space to navigate, but I think a lot of people, if you've done it multiple times, then you also do kind of get the hang of it and understand what's the correct way of approaching. There might be certain political windows of opportunity that might exist for you to strike when the time is right. For instance, when elections are coming, people are very willing to listen to what people have to say, and they even make promises at that point of time that you can follow up later. So people are, I think, those who have been working in this space have found ways to navigate the very fraught political realities of the times that we live in.
Madhu, any last comments?
Yeah, so I just add to, I think, see, in fact, the whole point is about accountability, right? So, in fact, I am personally someone who wishes to have the right to recall our politicians sometime. Just he's bad that we should recall, right?
At least you
In fact, it's happening.
experimenting at the local democracy level.
Yeah, at least that should be, because if you look at the US, in there are you can actually recall mayors, for example, right? In there are states where you can do that. So maybe we could start experimenting and see how, because this is exactly where I think, Ankush, we started the whole point about 5 years as a long period. Like, it's too long for us to sometimes make decisions in that context, right? So we need to have that regular check and monitoring of performance of people, right? So we, in fact, I remember a long time back, a media agency used to run this MP rating system where they used to check how many of them, how do they perform, but they're all rated based on how much of the bills they have tabled in the parliament, right? But not on the actual action on the ground, onto their constituency, right? So maybe at least at the ward level, at least we could do that, or probably at the councillors or the mayors or the city level, we could start thinking about it. And that will probably bring the change which we require, where there is some level of kind of a pressure or a fear, in fact, to perform, which is much more positive. So I would probably end with that note.
Thanks, Madhu. At this point, I would like to invite anybody from the audience if they have any comments, thoughts, or questions. Please feel free to ask or comment.
I think the only thing I can say is I don't envy you all. And all I can say is, oh my gosh, this is so difficult, right? It is, and without the passion, belief, commitment, it's just incredible. So hats off.
Okay. So I wanted firstly to start with some data numbers, but then I thought, let me just end with these data numbers for everybody to let me just leave everyone with what's happening and think how we probably can go from here. 64.2 crore people voted. 16% bills only were referred to parliamentary committees. MyGov has 60 million registered users. But what is happening there is a question. 251 of 543 elected Lok Sabha members, which is like 46%, have declared criminal cases. So what tools we have? In such a setting, why we question that the citizens are not participating enough? Maybe the future of democracy will not be decided only by who wins election. It will also be decided by what citizens do after elections, what institutions allow them to do, and whether we can build an ecosystem where participation is not symbolic, but consequential. And with this thought, I would like to end this session. Thank you very much for participating in it.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.